Okay, so now that we've completed adding green to our tomato, we can try a more vibrant orange or red tomato. And now I've got this small cherry tomato in a nice orangey red color, and I'm going to draw it, and I use my tomato as a guide to get the size right. I want to make it life size. It's pretty round, so I'm lightly drawing with a graphite pencil first and getting that tomato, and then I use my eraser to get rid of any marks I don't want. I draw very lightly so it's easy to get rid of things I don't like and that aren't correct. And once I have the size of the tomato, I'm going to start by doing that grisaille technique again, doing the toning of the tomato, but this time, instead of using a sepia color, I'm using a reddish deep wine color, as you can see here. And the reason is because I think that if I look at my tomato right next to what I'm drawing, I see in the shadowy area that it's a bit reddish in the shadow. And so by using this wine color, I'll start to get that shadow color. And then I start my toning using my light source the way I have the one above done and my sphere done. I use that light source model. I don't use the light source as it's on my tomato right now, because as you can see, the light is coming on my real tomato from a different direction. You can tell by the shadow where the light source is coming from and where the highlight is. And so it's actually not the light that I want to be using for a model, but it's a good light to illuminate my work surface, and that's why I have it like that. Because I have my light source in my head by now. I'm toning this like a sphere where I pretend my light is coming from the left. It starts from above my left shoulder and shines down on the tomato in front of me at about a 45-degree angle on the left. And it creates the shadow side on the right, and the highlight again is not going to be right in the center of the tomato, but a bit towards the upper left side of the tomato. And once I've gotten some of the shading started, I've picked up an orange pencil and I'm putting my orange right over the wine color, building my layers slowly, approaching where I'm going to leave that highlight, reminding myself always where is that highlight going to be. Not in the center, but to the left of center on the upper left quadrant of the tomato, right around there right now. So I slowly approach that highlight and leave it the color of the paper, and I'm going to make that highlight smaller and smaller and smaller as time goes on, because I don't want it to look like a hole. But in the beginning, I just leave an area for it, as I'm doing now. And after I've laid down some of the orange color, I come back in with the wine, because I'm going to get a nice blend of these colors together, as we did practice before when we did that tone bar. And I keep, layering slowly my color. Now this is a small tomato, and you can see I'm using tiny little circles and very slowly adding the tone, carefully, enjoying the process, feeling the three-dimensional quality of the tomato. As I draw over the surface of my paper, I almost feel at some point that my paper turns into that three-dimensional tomato, which is kind of fun. So I'm going to keep working this tomato, and by the way, as I said before, this tomato is life size, and in the case of a cherry tomato, it's small. It's maybe about an inch in diameter, and so I work. An inch in diameter is a pretty good size, actually. Once you've gotten comfortable doing your toning on a slightly lighter, larger form, you can really refine it on something about this size, because a lot of things are pretty small in botanical work. And so an inch, if you can get a nice range of toning from light to dark to create the three-dimensional form, and then have color on top of that, so your three-dimensional form is now in color, and in this case, because it's an orangey red tomato, there's a deep wineish reddish shadow color that then gradually turns into the reddish orange color of the tomato. The main color of the tomato, we would just call it red or orange or red orange. And then as it will approach that highlight, it will get lighter and lighter in value, in sort of an orangey, goldy yellow feeling, if I could put it in those terms. And now you can see that I'm covering the tomato pretty strongly with my orange pencil, using my tone in that feathering or graduated way, so that seamlessly the tones will change from as dark as I need to get to as light as I can get, which is the paper. And I leave that area where the highlight is going to be a bit bigger than I wanted it first, because it's easy to go in there and continue to make it go smaller and smaller. As you can see, I'm getting it smaller now. And I can't remind you enough to remember, where is that highlight going to be? It's going to stay on the upper left in that quadrant and not migrate to the center of your tomato. You don't want it right in the center. And to talk a little bit more about that, the reason being because you want your light to appear as if it's coming from the left side and not straight in front of the tomato. And that's why we do that. And now as I get closer and closer to that highlight, I'm making it a bit smaller as I go with tiny little strokes. Because in the end, you want to make sure your highlight appears to be a bright spot of shimmering light on your form and not sort of an empty space or a hole. And so you can see here I'm going closer and closer and filling in a bit more in an irregular way to create that, the idea of the highlight, which, interesting, you see my real tomato on the right, and you can see what that highlight looks at. And even if that highlight is not in the correct spot, which it isn't right now, the idea of the highlight is there. And so I can use it as a model to help me create that highlight. And now I want to go over the colors I'm using a little bit. So if you want to make note, here I'm using a cadmium yellow in the lighter areas to brighten and warm up the color a little bit closer to the highlight. Warm, bright colors move forward, so that helps with the illusion of higher, rounder form and the light hitting it. And there you can see I'm blending on a color bar how I practice using that color to make sure I like what it's doing. And then the dark cadmium orange is what I've used over most of the tomato, and I keep layering it over, as you can see here, mixing it now with some of that yellow. And I'll press a little bit harder and just fill it in more and more. In the end, I want a shiny, bright tomato, just like the surface of the tomato. And then I'm going to go now into that color I started with, which was the wine color, which is that deep burgundy kind of wine color called red violet. And you can see how that gives me the nice warm deep tones in the shadows. And then I'm going to use ivory to burnish, work on my reflective highlight right there and in my highlight area as well, to blend all my colors together, and that's the ivory color. And then at this point, I think I'm going to go in and add a little bit of a red, a pale geranium lake, to just redden up that orangey tomato just a bit, especially on the shadow side, so that the red will blend into the orange, which will blend into the yellow, and then the ivory for the highlight. So sometimes my colors are darker in value overall as well, and that helps with, again, that three-dimensional. It's a way of using color and the value of color to create three-dimensional form and that illusion of highlights versus shadows as well. Your lighter, brighter colors, warmer colors feel like they're coming closer to you, and the darker colors recede in space. So that's another way to even further create that illusion, to make that tomato look, make that tomato look round and very three-dimensional. And so you can see I've switched the light now just to show you with a different light, but it's very hard for me to show you exactly how you can use the light. You'll have to do that because we're looking at a different view here, but you can still see how that shimmery highlight, even in the wrong place, or that reflective highlight, even in the wrong place, can act as a model for me to put that reflective highlight now in the right place where I want it. And so I've erased a little bit on the edge to lighten that a little bit, and then I will blend back in the colors, because as I mentioned before, I want that highlight, or that reflective highlight, to kind of smoothly go into the rest of the round form of the tomato. So I'm going to keep adding more color on top and blending it more and more. Now I'm going to add in that cast shadow right next to the edge of the reflective highlight. That's a lot of different aspects we're going to create here in this tiny tomato. But when you can practice them like this on this small form, adding in your cast shadow, for example, putting in a reflective highlight, these are techniques and skills you'll have and you can use over and over again. And I got to say one thing right now in this video. I apologize for that really annoying curly hair that keeps going in front of the drawing. What that tells you, because I have curly hair, and when I lean down really close in because I want to get really close to my drawing to make it really accurate, sometimes my hair gets in front of the camera. And that's something I'm going to fix in future videos by either cutting my hair off or making sure I have it tucked away neatly before I start filming. And I apologize for that. But you can use it as a cue to know that, wow, Wendy is really, really leaning down close so she can see really closely what's going on her paper to get all the fine detail. But anyway, back to the cast shadow. I started it with the dark sepia, and now I'm using ivory to blend it together and make it less textural so that it's a quiet shadow, that it'll sit back quietly. As I mentioned before, it's the supporting cast and not the star of the show. And I can keep going back and forth, adding ivory to lighten the reflective highlight if it needs it, to smooth together the different colors as I go. And there's a pretty good example of all the components in this tomato, and now a little bit more smooth, kind of making that edge a little smoother on the left side with the red and the orange, to get a nice clean edge whenever possible. But that looks like a pretty round, bright, shiny tomato now. Something you're going to want to try.